we're back and we're moving into our first conversation for today. We're joined by two very familiar faces from Friends for Conservation and Development. And we know once they're here, they're going to be delivering news all the way from the Chiquibul. And so we want to say welcome to Raphael Manzanero, the Executive Director of Friends for Conservation and Development, and Park Manager, Derric Chan. Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, thank you for being here.
And our condolences.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for being here and being able to provide an update as to what's happening in the Chiquibul.
Certainly, certainly, and thanks so much for the invitation.
Yeah.
I think the last time when we came, the discussion was really more centered around what was going to happen at the for the voting in terms of
the referendum. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So that's a couple of weeks ago.
Can I ask, before we move on, just your own reflection as to the impact of the vote in the referendum?
Well, it seems that, the people were able to vote and to cast their decision in terms of what they had wanted. I think that for us on the ground, it certainly means that we still have to remain as always. We have to maintain the presence. We have to have the sort of the patrols ongoing. And that, of course, we knew it, regardless of whatsoever would have been the outcome. I mean, that's really, part of the work that has to be conducted every day out there.
Yeah, yeah. And in terms of communications with your counterparts, because I know you work very closely with environmental agencies across the border. Is this a highlight in terms of being able to work out a resolution within, with the problem with incursions in the Chiquibul?
It is a highlight. And in fact, I mean, from all that we understood, it was felt that this was really the best path in terms of really settling all of this that has been ongoing for many, many years. They felt that it was really one of those opportunities wherein, it could be taken into a legal aspect of things, and they felt that that was really the best path. We, of course, on the ground, we feel much more ascertained that we have to continue on the work of collaboration. And I think that is pretty much also a lot of the recommendations and advice given even by the government in terms of now really how do we are able to move forward, particularly with all the agreements that were done a couple of years ago. And one of those being the protection of the environment.
Absolutely. And just one more question in that vein. We're looking at perhaps a decision maybe 5-7 years. And at that point, there will be an official border marker between the two areas. How do you think that will change the scope of work that the FCD does on the ground?
Well, I feel that for sure we would have a better manner of upholding the rules and the regulations. At this point, it's always a big query in terms of how do we do it without really having any particular international outcry. It would seem to me that by having the border in terms of opening it and be able to have it highly visible. Like the last time I said, there is no kind of other excuse from Guatemalans to say that they did not really know where they were. At this point, the 1 kilometer of that area, it's always a very sensitive matter. In fact, as we discuss more about the cattle ranching, you will recognize that the OAS is certainly one of the key institutions that have to become involved, and that's where we have the discussions at this particular point.
I wanted to ask in terms of the morale of the officers who are down there and the energy from the international partners. Can you feel it on the ground? Is it that there's a renewed energy because people can see possibly almost the end of the road in terms of something definitive?
It seems to me it is still relatively new in terms of really understanding what really could be the sort of the understanding across the border. There was a sort of a feeling that there could have been even much more an abrupt movement of people into Belize. We have not really seen that. It was felt that probably there was even a greater need now really to have a much more higher level of presence it doesn't seem so, at least not at this particular point. So it feels then, and if that was really the scenario that we are seeing, and if it's really maintained, then it certainly means that we basically have to continue doing what we have been doing over the last 11 years, which basically is really to maintain the presence, continue the work of collaboration. Trying really to reduce any particular level of confrontations that can occur, and just really be able to operate in terms of that, manner of partnerships and cooperation across borders.
Yeah. All right. And you alluded to the fact that the issue of cattle ranching is one of the priorities that FCD and its partners have been working on. The last time you were here, we talked very openly about the impact of cattle ranches, what it could possibly signify. Where are we now?
I will ask Derric really to give an update on that.
Yeah.
I have a bad throat today. We have finished the with the draft, right? The strategy, which we call the cattle ranching strategy, and it's being looked at now, and it's pretty simple, right? How we're going to go about addressing, the cattle ranching. So we foresee that, this year, this month, next month, we should start to work on that. So, we're getting a lot of support, I'd say, from government.
What's the plan?
Well, basically the plan is we have flown, this year we've done several flights, we have identified, points, and mapped them. So now we need to go on the ground, because this has been done from the air and from the map. So we now need to go on the ground and verify that the sites are there. Yeah.
So you have to verify exactly where they are, whether they're in Guatemala or Belize.
No, we know where they are. Okay. So we get to verify what is the status of each point.
And whether or not they're active and whether or not they're expanding.
Yes. So the ground, it's called ground truthing, right?
Okay.
Because from the air and from the satellite map, you can see, and you can go back and see, which year this was gotten built. Sometimes you can see if there is a fence or if it's just a pasture. So we need to verify and ground truth each one of them and find their owners.
About how many of them are there? And what area is the average size of each?
Boy, the average size, I wouldn't be able to tell, I think, because they are one next to the other. I don't know if it's the same, right?
Yeah.
But I could tell you there is 81.
81?
81 pastures we identified. But we should also understand that we at this time, because we have not ground truthed each one, but we know they are there. That's a given, right? We don't know if all of them would have fences of cattle at a given time that we took the flights.
Flyover, yeah.
Yes.
So you see the clearing, which is indicative of establishing a pasture for cattle ranching.
No, it's pastures.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a pasture. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's 81 pastures, and we know of fences, right? That are there now. We started to ground truth some of them already.
So if there are 81 pastures, and let's say maybe conservatively speaking, there are an acre each. You got 81 acres?
No. There's some of them could be up to 200 acres.
No, man.
Yeah. There is one particular one. I think it's 500 acres.
Derric,
it's big. They are big. Yeah.
I hear you saying something, and I want to understand it further. You say you need to check whether or not they have fences. What's the difference?
Because a pasture, when you burn a forest, when the people burn the forest, they throw grass in there, right? And then every year they burn the grass, and the grass is vicious. It automatically expands itself. So that could be claimed as, when we go there and we see nobody, then you cannot really claim who owns it.
Okay.
But when they put a fence, it's because they already have said, this is mine now.
Yeah.
right? And now you could find an owner.
But nobody can own it because it's Crown land.
Yeah, yeah.
Owner, because
Yeah,
the owner is
in
the people
theory
and
they
government of
don't own
Belize.
it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they don't own that.
But in practice they
But in
are.
practice they claim,
They're
you know,
using
this
it.
is mine.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is theirs. Yeah, because they put the fence.
I think what's important to note though is that I mean these aerials are conducted in some 89 to 90 kilometers of the western border, starting way like from Arenal way down to Columbia River by Halacte. Now the estimate that Derric is given, and which we always can acknowledge that it is an approximation. It is very difficult. It can be more. The only way, and that's why the ground shooting is really important. First, really to look at, of course, to validate it on the points, and also to look at the extension. I mean, people have always been asking us, like, how much heads of cattle are out there? It's very difficult. At least not at this point. We cannot really say it unless we really go in and do a dedicated work and effort, which will take us quite some months, some weeks, really to go in and be able to tabulate all of this. You know, thankfully, as how Derric noted, you know, there is the Joint Protocol Commission, which is comprised of the Belize Defense Force, the police, the forestry, and us. It was at that level where now the discussions are with the OAS in terms of the coordination. The coordination meaning, because at the end of the day, particularly given that this is occurring within the 1 kilometer, it is highly important and critical that that is really a key institution that has to become involved in terms
so
of
you have a
really
witness
ensuring
to say that this is
we can
accurate.
have a witness and yes, a matter of validation of ensuring that yes, it is being done properly, and that the particular steps are being taken really on how to do, because it has to be a holistic movement. You know, it is not only a matter of just going to cut fences, because there can be also a resurgence of it. So we have to see it more from a holistic level. So, and that's where the discussions are at this particular point. I think the OAS, you know, thankfully they are still there as a special mission, and so in reality that is really a high part of their job really to do in terms of ensuring if this is, you know, within the Guatemalan, you know, territory or within Belize. I think the acreage that Derric was alluding to, in many cases, you know, there can be a cattle ranch that started in Guatemala, then it just moved into Belize. And
so some are cross-border.
Exactly, that's correct.
Now, what I hear from you in terms of what this ground trooping is doing is validating what you know already. You are seeing the pastors, you know that they're in Belizean territory, and we know that the perpetrators are coming from across the border, but it's kind of an official process. But one of the things my question is, you know, we've heard of the implications of cattle ranching and the people involved. How dangerous is this mission, going in and starting to counting cattle, dismantle fences within the Chiquibul?
I think, I mean, only knowing what we do in terms of the Guatemalan perspective, yes, we know it is a whole different sort of illicit activity. That is more organized, it can be more dangerous, and I think that's why it is highly important really to see it from a multifaceted approach. You know, part of it is basically also to socialize or be able to sensitize or inform. I think that's probably the best word, to inform our counterparts. You know, many people might argue the point, but why really inform? The point was really trying really to reduce any kind of tensions that can occur within the western border. And so that is really part of the strategy as well. You know, there is an association of cattle ranchers in southern Petén, which are really a key institution. You know, even informing the institutions like MAGA, the Ministry of Agriculture, with their counterparts of Baja here in Belize are really important. I think at least only for them really to understand what is transpiring, and if any actions are being taken abruptly or into the future, then at least they already knew that there are actions that are being already planned and that will be implemented.
Using the Joint Patrol Protocol, who all will be involved in the ground trooping?
We would expect all of them.
So you're talking, but tell me who. It'll be
the Belize Defense Force, the police, the forestry, and us.
Now, in terms of, Wilma here was a bit critical once he came on television. It was a bit critical because he was saying that these cattle ranches don't just appear overnight. He says it's a process, and you were explaining part of the process that they burn, and for it to get to 200 acres, you must have identified it sometime earlier. What is the difficulty that allows it to get so large and so established? Is it that the procedure, too much red tape? Is it that we don't have the resources to be able to police it after we've identified that it started? What is the problem that allows it to expand?
I think in the case of Chiquibul, we basically know, and we have been saying this for quite some years, that for us on the ground, it always has been a matter of what is really the top priority. We always have been contending with several multiple issues, and there is no way that we really can grapple with the 6 or 7 of them at one single time. Yeah. We started with xate. Yes. We went into illegal logging. Yeah. At that time, cattle ranching was not really as what now we are actually informing about. We were dealing with agricultural farming. Yeah. But whenever we start to look at it really in terms of a point where it reaches in terms of size, extent, the human footprint expansion, that's whenever we start really to put it into the high level. In other words, it's going to pop in from a yellow to a red. And that's how we have to do it. For example, right now, one of our top priorities right now would be the illegal wildlife trafficking, in terms of protecting scarlet macaws. Yeah. We know that this is the season. So we probably have to abandon this area and go back again to somewhere else.
And then by the time you come back, it'll probably double.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's really one of those kind of conditions where if we were to have all the manpower, if we were really to be able to place and deploy, people all across, of course it would make a major difference. But, that is really the situation where we really have to go in terms of looking at the hotspots. Yeah. Gold is another matter. It's not really that high right now. So in our planning processes, we can say, we can leave that at least for now. We know it's a problem, but it's not really high as the other ones.
So whichever is the biggest problem at the moment, that's what you're tackling.
That's correct.
Can I go back to this in terms of, we had read an article some time ago that said that these cattle ranches are not just, sometimes they're not just happenstance, that they're part of a larger drug and cartel organization where the drug cartels use these as transshipment points. They use it at for different illegal activities. Have we seen an increased interest in Interpol or in our international crime-fighting partners to say, listen, this is not just about a border issue. This is not just about trespassing and raping of our forests, but this poses a threat to us. So we are going to now either dump financial assistance to you or manpower on the ground to allow us to manage this and to create intelligence. Have we seen an increase from the international crime fighting side of it?
I think that probably would be a question more towards the police. I would only say that we certainly feel that intelligence sharing is something that has been recommended for quite some years of increasing, the type of intelligence even for environmental crimes. I would not really know. That would be a discussion probably that they might have, between the police.
And that's not something discussed in the joint protocol, the group that you named?
At least not until now.
Wow.
So when you get on the ground and you encounter the pastors in this ground trooping exercise, what will you do? Measure, you verify with GPS?
Yeah, yes. We have to verify where the border is. And then we would pretty much measure. It's a little bit difficult to measure. The GPS now can measure, just find 4 points and that calculates it. Yeah. But sometimes a pasture is not like square, so you have to find like 20 points, for one pasture.
Yeah. And when you encounter a pasture that's fenced in, what will you do? Verify it in Belize. Will you take down the fences?
Well, we should. We don't always do it, and that is one thing when you mention about Will Mejia and why has this, it doesn't happen overnight. Yeah. Really, we are an NGO, right? And we are there to protect life, to study the birds and the plants. We weren't really designed to go and do that. That's the government's job. Yeah. So one of the things that, if you question how it happened overnight, that you can ask that the government. Yeah. But I could tell you. yeah, why it's not addressed when it needs to be addressed. You know, we have this problem with Guatemala, with the CBMs and verification, the OAS, etc. So that is a process, right? But we could tell you, I could tell you, if you go to the CBMs, we should be able to address this in 7 days,
Yeah.
right? And if you can go back to your maps, it doesn't take long for you to download from the internet satellite imagery and do a flight and start to map these things and say, let's go do this thing here, right? That's the question.
I'm kind of concerned, but I'm sort of concerned about you guys' safety. Because if, look at it this way, this scenario. You're doing your job, and I think that you're probably doing the more of the job than you probably should do in terms of my concern for your safety. And you take down the fences. The cattle, I don't know what we do with them. What do we do with the cattle?
Yeah.
We just release them?
Well, no, we don't release it. I mean, we don't even take them. I mean, we
They're
are
left
not.
to roam?
Yeah.
to roam?
Well, they come and get their cattle because they know they're in Belize.
Okay.
And when it comes to safety, yeah, there is a concern of safety, but I don't think we're doing anything wrong. You know.
No, you're not. Actually, you're upholding the law. No different from a police officer who goes to an establishment and sees a crime being committed, because it is a crime to come across our border.
Yeah.
But my concern is, what happens if you get the angst of the cartel, of the drug and persons on the ground who have these cattle ranches, and they decide, you know what, we're going to put up a stance. This whole thing, and we don't care if we're in Belize, Guatemala, we're going to now show aggression and force. Do we have a plan in place to deal with that level of aggression, to even stop it before it even starts? Because that's not a governmental thing. That's a crime organization to government thing, almost terrorism.
I mean, as an institution, as FCD, you know, perhaps one of our biggest roles has been really to monitor and bring the information out. We started to speak about cattle ranching quite some years ago because of the very same reason that we did not really want it to escalate into something that not even Belize would be able to control it eventually. You know, away even from FCD, our institutions. If we leave it at that extent, it will be really, really difficult. We already know that. So, like what Derric was noting, it basically takes its own process, which is unfortunate. Because in terms of cattle ranching, we already have some of the data. We already have the information. We already can see the trends. My preparation of the papers that we did, I basically noted that, for example, in the Maya Biosphere Reserve, there are 60,000 heads of cattle right now.
Wow.
And the government of Guatemala cannot actually finish with those over the many years. That's 60,000 heads of cattle. Now, and so we know what really can happen. So that's why our intent had been really by bringing the information, by developing the plans and developing the strategies, then in a cohesive manner we can start really to address it, you know, before it reaches to that point where then it becomes really difficult and where then tensions can become even much more difficult and complex for all institutions involved.
Who's dropping the ball?
I'm sorry?
Who's dropping the ball? Is it the OAS? Is it our government? Who's dropping the ball?
I mean, the OAS...
we want to avoid and prevent.
I mean, the OAS is basically, in this case, an arbitrator or basically one to validate. Like in many environmental problems, which is all across the globe, you know, people can only start really to do something until they really see that it's really a high hotspot area. You know, and that's what really is rather unfortunate in all of these environmental issues. You know, it's not really seen as a big crime, you know. I mean, environmental crimes are still petty in a way for all throughout the globe. So for us, you know, we felt that the numbers were going to make the difference. I mean, that's what we have always felt. I mean, we have a research unit specifically only to gather the numbers so that I can tell you and say, you know what, we have lost $60 million worth of timber. And you might feel that somebody is going to click and say, you know what, this thing is really a major problem. But I can tell you that we have brought up these numbers. And you know what, at the end of the day, almost nobody calls us. So it's like, it really, I mean, you might feel that at the end of the day.
That number was used in the education campaign for the referendum, though. I did hear it. And so I think people are hearing, but whether there's an action that is triggered by the information you're putting forward, I think is where there seems to be a gap. And you're quite right, Raphael. I know we have been talking on the show with you about cattle ranching for a long time, and I think it's always been concerning when you do the research and you look up what type of persons are involved with cattle ranching. If you look at the Mexico-Guatemala border, there is a link that is typically made to drug organizations. Do we know if that is the case with the pastures that we're seeing in our area? Do we have enough information to be able to say it seems that way?
We basically already can verify that yes, we already are reaching to that point where it needs, and it would seem apparent to us now that yes, now the institutions are moving towards really addressing this matter.
Okay.
I hope then that by the next time we come, we might be able to inform what are really some of the actions. Or perhaps, I mean, it would be really good to invite the Ministry of National Security, because they would be able then really to also answer some of your queries.
What's the level of human activity in these pastures?
Level of human activity.
Yeah, I mean, what do you know about, are there a lot of people moving around? Are people living near the pastures, monitoring the cattle?
No.
Or is it that they come, bring the cattle and leave for...
Yeah, mostly you don't see the people themselves, you know. All you know is that it's people and they have owners, you know. So that's, I mean, that's the difference between cattle and milpas, you know, because a milpa, each milpa has an owner and a campesino has an acre.
Yeah.
A cattle rancher has 100 acres and it's one guy, right? So, but he will have workers, no? I mean, the
So
worker.
they're mostly unattended.
Yeah, that's how cattle is managed. In primitive, you know, ways of managing cattle, you know, cattle should be managed just like how you manage your workers.
So you build a pond, grow the grass, and leave them there.
Yeah, just put your cattle there. You don't need to watch them all day, you know.
And because they have not really been hit or targeted, then of course they are basically at ease.
So I want to be very clear. So you're going to do your ground trooping. Is there a decision? Is there a decision that has been made once you've verified that this is within Belizean territory and it's a fenced area? What will you do next?
Remove it.
Remove the fences.
Yeah, but then we have another component to the awareness, you know, and education and that kind of stuff, you know, that, you know, so that they don't return. So, I mean, we give you an opportunity that people are, you know, remove their fence.
Okay.
And their cattle.
So you'll issue a warning that you need to remove the fence.
Yeah.
Through who? Through your Guatemalan counterparts?
Yeah, we have to find a way to do it to the counterparts.
Okay.
And, you know, really and truly, what I have seen is, you know, a lot of these fences have been built in the past, you know, 2 years, 3 years maybe. I mean, even this year, I can't really tell how much because it's difficult to really go to all places all the time. But, I mean, this year there have been fences being built. So, you know, there was one case where, you know, the patrol went and they removed the fence. And the worker, the rancher, he came down and just took his cattle, or herd them and took it back to Guatemala, to the side in Guatemala, and he didn't argue, he didn't say nothing, because they know they are in Belize, you know. So it is a matter of awareness. When we arrest a lot of people and we get to see people there, you know, along the border, they always say, we want the border to be defined properly because then we don't have to be arguing, you know. So sometimes don't think that we are at fight or, you know, we are at peace to a large extent. People know that they are coming into Belize, but they will take advantage of it, you know. It's like, I don't know, if I see $100 in the ground, I'll pick it up. Unless you tell me, why, that's mine, I'll give it back to you. Otherwise, it's mine. It's mine now, you know.
And that to me is like the point. Raphael, you said that Belize is rich in an interview. We have the proof. I mean, literal gold. It's you know, Belize is a gold mine, literally. My question is, should we see an evolution in the way that we look at the Chiquibul? Because as you have been saying, you know, you've been telling us, listen, Belize, on the rich, we have gold, 16 so much million of dollars in timber, the best stock in the world. Should we relook at the way that we're looking at the Chiquibul to sort of bring a direct monetization value to it that people can appreciate in real time?
we actually started to discuss this aspect of a paradigm shift of management for the Chiquibul. Now, whenever we say this, though, in terms of the richness, we always have to be very, very careful, because just like what you think, and obviously we feel, it basically can mean for the longest good, for the greater amount of people, for the best of this country. Well, I can tell you, and you will know probably better than me, that there are other people who are basically looking only at what they can grab out of this.
Absolutely.
So I can tell you that even though we do have a problem with Guatemala's transboundary issues over the last, 20 or 30 years in Chiquibul, from 1984 or so, I certainly know, and we basically can also look at the trends. The future of Chiquibul can be a challenge, and the major threat can be from within Belize. The development of what Chiquibul can become, or what is going to be, it does not necessarily mean that all of that richness can be for the greater good of this country. And that is what environmentalists always would say it. They say, for whom are we protecting this thing eventually? We hope that we as a service institution for this country, that is for the greater good. So at one point in terms of management, which we do, that's what we do every day. We actually felt that we had to do a paradigm shift of management. Okay, what does that really mean? You have heard about the IDB, the Sustainable Tourism Program Phase 2. You have heard about the $80 million to basically upgrade that road way down to Caracol. I can tell you there are many people today that already are looking what kind of lands they can get around these areas.
But it's
we
a
have
part
the
of the protected area.
Which is part of the protected area. So, people basically have said, Raphael, if there's gold in Chiquibul, why don't you give it to companies in Belize? Well, there is one company that has a license. But I can tell you that it is pretty much, what you see here, for example, in this poster here, which basically says, is the birthplace of the Greater Belize watershed. We have basically spoken about the 43% or 45% of Belize that depends upon the water. And that's where gold panning is occurring right here at the birthplace. And that is where also the gold mining activity, which is really with a concession, is basically operating also. So what is best? We have a dilemma here in our hands where we can say, can we, is that worth it more, or the water is worth it more?
Yeah. Well, you see, I think that's one of the questions I have when you use the value that you quoted before, $60 million worth of timber. While that is the value of what has been extracted and sold, had it not been extracted and sold, it would have been a part of the richer forest, not necessarily funds that would have been attributed to Belize, because the Chiquibul is a protected area. And when you talk about the gold, it is very much the same. If we talk about whether or not Belizeans can go into the Chiquibul and extract their own gold, as the Guatemalans are doing illegally, it's not a reality as to what's going to happen. So you're talking more conservation, because the Chiquibul should be maintained in the condition that it is, or
perhaps, Marlene, I think that it's really management. Yes, conservation and management, but I think overall the overarching word is, conservation. Whenever we break that word, basically it is proper management and wise use. So we basically can say, we can use it. The problem is, how do we really put all the mechanisms in place? I always argue my point to say, why do we give a concession way down into the southern tip of Chiquibul, when I can tell you almost nobody will go and monitor that activity?
A concession
almost nobody will go, for
the
gold.
gold mining.
DOE won't go. Nobody will want to go unless it's a helicopter, but nobody will go. So who is going to monitor? It's us at the end of the day. And that's a cost, which is accrued to us. So the paradigm shift that I'm talking about, and in fact there is a large discussion and several consultancies that are up and going right now for the greater block of the mountain pine ridge, the Chiquibul forest, and Caracol. The question is, what governance structure should be there for this bigger block? It's really a very complex one. It's highly complicated because of all the resources. I would not probably have any problem if a part of the park is excised really for management of timber stocks.
Yeah.
But there are certain areas that you cannot do it. For example, the headwaters, where you really need it for another resource.
Yeah.
So I think that is appropriate management.
What I
how
hear
do we
from
really do
you
this?
is perhaps a shift in the long-term vision, or a possibility of a shift in the long-term vision. Let's use xate as an example. They have a wonderful example of having a protected area, fully protected, but also an area where they work along with communities for sustainable farming practices. So it's being able to do both in an area that they manage. Are you saying, Raphael, that perhaps that may be the future of Chiquibul? Maybe not farming, but some other practice?
I mean, we do basically the same thing in the Vaca Forest Reserve. We work with 22 farmers. There were 2 stories last week in terms of beekeeping, and the other one of agroecological methods in the Vaca.
Yeah.
But that is a different kind of a management program, because communities and Belizean communities are dotted right around this. So you have to put the human dimension into place.
Okay.
In the Chiquibul, it's very different.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really mean that the human dimension cannot come in. I mean, we have spoken about 7 miles of San Antonio. If tourism is going to be a major kind of a development phase into that zone, of course we would love that the economy can be basically built in even much more for the Coyote District and throughout the country, but based upon something that is removed. In other words, it's tourism.
Yeah.
The Chiquibul Caverns. Guys, the biggest cave room on the Western Hemisphere is right there. We are pushing right now, and hopefully it will become the 2nd World Heritage Site for Belize.
Wow.
Imagine if that happens for the Chiquibul Forest.
Yeah.
If we could do that, then we basically elevate that status. It can be used, but it's not really a use in terms of extraction. It's really more of the tourism stuff.
What is holding that back? That should be easy.
It's not
It's a
that
process.
easy. I mean, it's
That should be easy.
at the end of the day,
You
at the end of
It's a
the
10-year process.
I mean, I
as a
am.
nationalist, yes, that seems
I think-
easy.
Yes, as a nationalist.
I am
Everything we
glad-
have.
Show me a
beautiful.
comparative place. This is, you said, is one of
I
the
mean, it
largest
has
in the-
all the resources there. I mean, the natural arch, you see it right there. Now, the fact about this is that it is a process. I mean, we are only an NGO. It has to be championed, and in fact, the paradigm shift that we are talking about right now, I am glad in a way that it is basically shouldered by economic development and under the Prime Minister's office desk for this paradigm shift on how really to look at this bigger block. Because I can tell you, once again, to reiterate it, many people see it from only a part of. They say, goodness, I see trees. I mean, some people who go there, they are not looking at tourism. They are saying, you know what? I mean, this tree can give me $3,000. I mean, it's numbers on their minds.
Yeah.
I mean, the gold. I mean, this thing probably has about $90 probably here.
Yes, a huge chunk. That's a huge nugget.
So so how do we really put all of this thing into context? The carbon stocks, the water resources. Do we have a cost for the water? I mean, we don't have a figure for this thing. So how do we really put all of this for the long-term haul? I mean, environmentalism and conservation is the long-term, benefits.
Yeah.
Can I ask this question finally, because I know we're running out of time. But it's kind of like somebody who lives alone, and then nobody comes and sees them, and then on their birthday, everybody rushes to their house, sing happy birthday, and then they go away.
Yeah.
Is that kind of like the way you guys feel at FCD in terms of Belize doesn't give you guys, the average Belizean doesn't give you guys the attention, the financial respect, because the budget that you guys have is almost a joke for what we're asking you to give us back.
I think one of the reasons that we are here is to inform Belizeans, that they know that it's out there. It's the Chiquibul. This is biology and romantics, and we've been saying for many years. It's, to me, the Chiquibul, it's a factory, right? It's a factory where the water is coming out from there. It's working. The forest is there.
Fresh air, yeah.
The fresh air. Tourism, etc. And the Chiquibul, when we always say the Chiquibul, but the Chiquibul is actually, the Chiquibul forest, as we know it, is 3 protected areas. And Chiquibul Forest Reserve there is actually concessions there for timber, for tourism, and different things, right?
There,
And for gold.
And then, yes, and for gold. And Caracol has the archaeological reserve where tourism is happening there.
Derric, I'll tell you this. Belizeans take a lot of things for granted. It's our forest, and you know, and we get on TV, we on the street side, we say, we rich, we got Chiquibul, and then Guatemala come out, take it. But on the ground, in terms of appreciating and actually knowing what we have, you speak about carbon, average Belizean doesn't know the value of it, how to extract it. They actually feel a disconnect between it being there and it having a benefit to them. And so the struggle is to get them to connect to say the carbon there, the gold there, I am connected to it, and so I have to give my support to the government, to the OAS and to FCD to make sure this is there for us. How do we do that? Impossible task.
I think it really has to be multifaceted once again.
Yeah.
We felt that in order for people really to understand more the value, we have to bring in also the data in.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a cars management unit only for caves. Their job is only to do inventory and go into sinkholes, looking at Maya monuments, only for us really to bring in all of those features, of the cultural features, and to highlight it. Because we need to prove it. We really need, if we're going to go into World Heritage, I can tell you this will take us probably about 10 years. I mean, I felt, you know, or 5 years probably. I hope it's 5 years. It will be dependent upon the government of Belize to push it as part of their main agenda, really to put it up, you know, there. So we need really to be rapid in bringing all the data in. But one of the things and one of the reasons why we wanted to elevate it is because we felt that that really gives it security of the long-term haul. And that's why we wanted to do it, because we felt, I mean, you know how it goes. If people see values, I mean, we can be protecting this forest for a concessionaire in the next 10 years. I mean, the carbon stocks in Belize have thought about basically privatizing the carbon stocks at one point in the past, like in the mountain pine ridge. The Chiquibul has about $2 billion worth of carbon stocks from the first approximations. So the big challenge for us guys and what we are basically facing, one is if you have a rich resource, how do you do it for sustainable use? And that is really the key question that many thinkers are wondering now, what do we do with Chiquibul? I mean, we are part of these kind of discussions, which I'm glad that the people are inviting us to sit there also to at least be able to provide the data and say, you know what, guys, we can see it from a different light. It doesn't have to be the same kind of what other countries have been doing, of cutting their forests and then doing reforestation. We don't have to do that. We basically still have it. And that is where we are in terms of a crossroads right now. It's the development, but how do we really maintain it for the long haul, which is really the key word for conservation or the key definition of that. So
my final question though, because and it ties in so closely to what you're saying. There's been a lot of reactions to the $80 million investment in the road to Caracol, whether it's justified, worthwhile, necessary. And I want to ask from your perspective, it's a very hefty investment for, you know, it's not one of our top tourist destinations. It's one of the challenging areas to get into. I've personally not been to Caracol. I don't know what the experience would be like, but it clearly shows that there's a vested interest because it's a hefty investment. What does that indicate to you?
Well, I mean, you can see it from different lights. I mean, for one is that there has been now attention put into the Western Maya Mountains. You know, I mean, I mean, Caracol is the highest temple that you will find anywhere in this country. It's 43 meters in height. You will gather that many of the, I mean, Cayo has over 200 tour operators or tour guides. I mean, Cayo depends a lot on the tourism base. However, that road is really bad, I can tell you. I mean, you break your vehicles, maintenance is really high. The idea of upgrading that road is basically to have much more access to it. Instead of actually deviating tourism to Tikal, the idea was really why not really deviate it to Caracol. Now, it also can have its challenges and threats. Now, Caracol is on the northern part. I mean, Caracol is 5% of the bigger, Chiquibul forest. It's 5%. So in other words, it is part of a tip only, and then all the rest is basically wilderness. The type of tourism that we want for Chiquibul is completely different. It's not the kind of the cruise ships. We are not looking for that. It's a different kind, and that's why the paradigm shift again. Why not really have something that is really wild and wilderness, where you really can have, you know, a nice experience that you will not be able to get anywhere else. We still have it.
From what I'm hearing, you're saying that the money is expended for the road, and the road itself is possibly a good thing for Chiquibul?
I think that the investment in terms of moving for access and tourism can be a good one. But the problem with all of this is that, I mean, a road alone and tourism will be dependent upon how viable your areas are. In other words, if you go to the Mountain Pine Ridge today, the Mountain Pine Ridge doesn't even have a management plan. The Pine Ridge doesn't even have almost no personnel who is looking after this forest. My query for me has been then the investment, is it only hanging alone, or is it within a bigger strategy? Because that is what it takes. I mean, if you go there, you're going to have, you know, a grim day of just looking at the forest that is killed by the bark beetles, forest fires, all of that. It doesn't really give you this kind of that ambient of a beautiful experience in the Mountain Pine Ridge, and that's where a lot of the investment will go. So it has to be seen from a bigger stuff. My argument has been, well, if we're going to invest on that, then we need to also put a proper, you know, management for this area, which for me is protection of the forest and the wild animals in the zones. If we want really, because the base of tourism,
overall experience.
Exactly, because you need that. Yeah. It's a protected area. But I don't want, but I would hate to see that as a result of the road, of the highway or the paved road, it means that the area becomes even much more fragmented. And if that's the case, then, I mean, for me as an environmentalist, I mean, for me, we are not really doing it, you know, properly.
Raphael, we have you at the wrong place. We need you at ministerial level to make some policy decisions for us as a country.
I prefer to be here.
Well, thank you for coming in once again. You know, I think that we appreciate getting the update from you as to the work that you're doing. And definitely want to hear back about the ground trooping exercise. And of course, we didn't get to touch as much, but as you've said, gold panning seems to be one of the more frequent activities at this time. You recently were able to capture gold panners in action, and they were arrested. And this is the actual sample that you received that they had found. Keep up the good work, and thank you for coming in.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. All right. We're going to go ahead and take a break, and when we come back, we'll be talking about World Accreditation Day. So stay tuned.